Hello, students. I want to review some of the concepts of photosynthesis, but in the process, I want to talk to you about a concept that some people call Cornell notes. I read about it in a book called Make It Stick, the Science of Successful Learning. But basically, this is a strategy on reading. So as you're reading, you should be thinking to yourself, what kinds of assessment questions could arise from that reading? So let's take a look at section 5.1, which is the reading about photosynthesis. So here we go, solar dependence in food production. So here we're reading about autotrophs. If you're in lab, we talked about that in lab. Basically, there are classes of organisms that can harness the energy of the sun in their cellular materials, and therefore they are self-feeders. Plants are autotrophs, algae, cyanobacteria. Then we have heterotrophs, and these are organisms that require other means to feed themselves. So these include animals and fungi. And so essentially these are two reproductive pathways. We talked about cellular respiration. Both autotrophs and heterotrophs do cellular respiration when their bodies are doing cellular work and moving, repairing, etc. And then only autotrophs do photosynthesis because they have special organelles. So let's just take a moment. Now, having just read that one paragraph, we can start to think about what that might look like in a quiz. So we heard about autotrophs and heterotrophs. So you might write in the margin of your notes or think to yourself, what is the difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs? What do these word roots mean? Now, what questions do you have? Think about them and take a moment to write them down. Okay, now we're talking about the main structures and summary of photosynthesis. In the first sentence, photosynthesis requires sunlight, comma, carbon dioxide, comma, and water as reactants. And so if I were writing notes, I'd write reactants, and then under it, sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. And then the question behind that would be, what are the reactants of photosynthesis? And we actually asked that specific question in lab last week. So we have these inputs, sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, and through the cellular process of photosynthesis, oxygen is released and carbohydrate molecules are created. And we typically only talk about glucose, but there are a lot of different molecules. And these molecules are energy molecules, and they do the work that living things need to do to survive. And that includes microscopic work on the cellular side, like cellular respiration, but it also is physical movement, heat production, etc. So we looked at this equation if you're in lab. And so this would be a great thing to write down, and you can be guaranteed that if there's only one equation in a chapter, that it's probably going to show up in the assessment. So that would be something to study. And when you're looking at chemical equations, it's good to take a moment and think about what the letters and numbers mean. And so here we might take a moment and think this is 6 carbon dioxide molecules. A carbon dioxide molecule has carbon and oxygen in a 1:2 ratio. Then we have 6 water molecules. Water molecule has hydrogen and oxygen in a 2:1 ratio. And then look, sugars always have this 1:2:1 ratio. And so knowing that would be helpful in the future. Also noticing that all words that are sugar chemicals are called OSE. OSE is the suffix. So these are the kinds of clues that you can really start to pick up on when you're taking notes, and you can predict how they're going to be employed in an assessment situation. And in my favorite book, Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning, they talk about thousands of medical students who employed certain tactics to study and those who did not, and their achievement levels were statistically different. And so I'm trying to help you to both learn some material and understand how you can help yourself, because we're getting right up into this zone where you have to take the first quiz, and there are 50 questions and there's 1 minute per question. And so you need to be prepared. These are ways to prepare yourself. Okay, so as we continue to talk about photosynthesis, we're thinking about the structure of the leaf. Notice there are words here in bold print, and you'd want to write those down and know what they are, or at least know where they are in the textbook. And so then we look at a diagram like this. And I personally am a visual learner, so it really helps me to be able to look at a diagram. And so here we see that there's a structure to the leaf, and that it's not symmetrical. And so gas exchange occurs on the bottom side of the leaf through stomata. And these are openings where gas can come in and gas can come out. And then in this mesophyll is where photosynthesis actually occurs. So if you think about it, like the chemical reaction is not occurring in the lower epidermis, it's occurring in another part of the cellular structure in the middle. And so in the mesophyll, we have inside of the cells chloroplast, and these are what make plants green. They contain pigments, and there are lots of pigments that are not green. For example, when the leaves senesce in the fall here in Colorado, the aspen leaves, you can see the carotenoids and other um, pigments showing up after the green pigments are fading away. So anyway, now we're looking at the design of the chloroplast. So I make a big deal about talking about membranes and membranous organelles when we're just talking about what organelles are. So the big deal about membranes is there's a lot of surface area. So when the energy of a photon enters the mesophyll of the leaf, it excites the molecules in these stacks, and these are called thylakoid stacks, and they have granum and stroma. And so when we think about the processes of photosynthesis, the light reactions occur in the granum, so that the photon actually like strikes the granum, and chemical reactions occur through the membranes. And then the Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma, which is the inner space inside of the chloroplast. So here we go. This plant cell should look familiar from our previous learning. You already know this is an organelle. It's not even on this figure. And here we're looking inside the organelle and thinking about where the chemical processes occur. So that's how we're digesting the image. So we're going on, and I just mentioned these two parts of photosynthesis, that light-dependent reactions in the Calvin cycle. So those are two huge categories. You got to take notes about those. So in the light-dependent reactions, which I mentioned, occur in the membranes of the thylakoid. The chlorophyll is absorbing that energy and converting it into chemical energy. And so when we talk about how this happens, oxygen is released from the hydrolysis of water. So what does hydrolysis mean? It means actually like lysis means to break, and hydro means water, so to break water. So the oxygen goes away and the hydrogens are used to proceed a chemical process in which ATP is produced at the end and glucose. So here we are. We just went through one whole section of the reading in under 10 minutes, and I know that you can do the same thing. And that's the way to do this. Digest it into little pieces. Don't try to take on too much, but think deeply while you're doing it. Now, if I were a student, I could turn right around and just convert whatever I just did and thought in the last 10 minutes into a discussion post and post it. And one last thing, remember that if you've written those questions, you should review them. You should answer those questions for yourself when you are studying for the quiz. And that is the final piece, the strategy that the medical students used to envision what the quiz questions are and then to practice those and then to go into the assessment feeling much more confident and aware of what might be there. So I hope you can do the same thing.